about 20 years now. But remember, a revelation time now. So if you don't want me reveal something, say reveal. Watch ya now. No for them a laugh and a laugh. Watch ya. Me a reveal tonight, so watch ya. Me never drop down from my barn. Me hear some little drop down. Through them want Rasta look weak. Me don't want a boy make it look like say Rasta can't lift up the tickers, No bother with the joke. No bother make the tickers feel like me can't lift her up, All who are born liar than thief say lava. Remember, I'm modern time now. Go and bring in a receipt, right? Make sure you bring in a receipt. All who say me drop down, make sure you can prove it. Alright, watch ya now. We're not even waste no time on them. I never drop down from a bar. Next track!
Can a man who built his entire career preaching purity and righteousness survive the moment the internet accused him of faking his own collapse on stage? For years, whispers followed Wayne that a dramatic fainting spell early in his rise was staged for sympathy. When an interviewer finally confronted him about it directly, his response wasn't what anyone expected. Rather than dodging the accusation, he threw the challenge right back at his doubters, daring anyone questioning him to bring actual proof and framing the entire episode as a coordinated smear aimed at discrediting his commitment to a plant-based lifestyle. To understand why that moment carries so much weight, you have to understand who Wayne actually is. Born Cliff Roy Taylor on August 6, 1980, in Portmore, Jamaica, he grew up shuttling between the bustle of the city and the quieter rhythms of the mountains near Glengough in the Stony Country, a childhood spent across both rural and urban Jamaica that later shaped how naturally he could write about ordinary struggle on either side. Raised largely by his aunt and her husband, celebrated keyboardist Errol Collins, young Cliff Roy grew up surrounded by instruments and rehearsal sessions from the time he could walk. By age 7, he was already experimenting with sound long before anyone outside his household knew his name. He attended Greater Portmore High School, where he linked up with a local outfit called Vibes Machine, a crew of singers and DJs performing at after-work parties around local clubs, refining timing and stage presence years before any label came calling. One night, the rest of the group ran late, forcing him to carry an entire set alone. And the crowd's response to that unplanned solo performance became the spark that convinced him to chase a solo career in earnest. Writing came early too, tracing back to notebooks he kept in school, though the real discipline came later, reciting lyrics over and over until they locked permanently into memory. His first real studio session happened at a modest facility near his neighborhood, run by an engineer he still only refers to by a nickname tied to Zion. A small room down by the boulevard where, he says, the atmosphere was calm and patient long before mixing and polish turned raw verses into something broadcast-ready. The record that changed everything arrived in summer 2004. Can't Satisfy Her became his breakout single, built around the devastating cycle of a young woman pulled into transactional relationships and disease. When later asked directly whether it was truly his first hit, he confirmed it was, clarifying that although another song, Living in Love, had actually been recorded earlier, this was the record that introduced him to the world. The origin of the song was deeply personal. Watching young women in his own community reduced to desperate circumstances left him disturbed enough that turning it into music felt like the only proper response, an act he described as rooted in genuine love for his people rather than judgment cast down on them. When pushed on whether society itself had manufactured that desperation, he agreed without hesitation, then argued the problem was fixable through cleaner communities, more job opportunities, and a collective refusal to normalize the decay he saw spreading through certain neighborhoods. That single became the first record by a cultural reggae artist added to New York's Hot 97 playlist, a station known for its hip-hop leanings, and it spent weeks on the Billboard Hip-Hop and R&B Singles chart. VP Records signed him that November, and his debut album, Lava Ground, arrived in summer 2005, earning praise for pulling reggae back toward its roots at a moment when much of the genre had drifted toward party-oriented dancehall. With both Can't Satisfy Her and Living in Love as anchor singles, the album cemented his name internationally within a single cycle and positioned him as the face of a new conscious movement in Jamaican music. International touring followed quickly, with his first performance outside Jamaica taking him to Barbados alongside another established act, a show he remembers as a good vibe despite the nerves of stepping onto unfamiliar soil for the first time. Momentum kept building through November 2007 with Book of Life, a project his executive producer framed as a deliberate counterweight to a reggae landscape saturated with violence, choosing instead to center ecology, discipline, and spiritual responsibility. Tracks like Jealousy and Abuse tackled domestic violence directly, expanding his reputation into a serious, respected voice within conscious reggae. By 2011, Life Teachings arrived as his third studio album, again built around righteousness, featuring a duet with fellow Jamaican artist Itana that softened his usually stern delivery, though the project never replicated the crossover explosion of his debut single. Underneath all of that music sits something that's shaped nearly every controversial stance Wayne has ever taken publicly. His devotion to Rastafarian principles, applied with almost total consistency across every part of his life. Asked point-blank whether women should use birth control, he rejected the idea outright, calling it something destructive to life itself and arguing that readiness for parenthood, not medical intervention, should govern the decision to have children. That same rigid framework came up again when he was pressed on physical intimacy between unmarried partners, and his answer was a blunt refusal, insisting there are ways to show real closeness with a partner that don't require crossing into what he considers inappropriate territory. When asked how he'd respond if a pastor approached him asking for money to help build a church, he declined without hesitation, saying he'd rather put resources directly into feeding hungry people than into physical structures tied to an institution he associates with a legacy of punishment and inquisition. Styled discipline he can't reconcile with genuine spiritual practice, positioning Rastafari instead as something inseparable from the natural rhythms of life rather than a competing religion built on hierarchy. That same uncompromising stance extends to modesty, where he's argued that public nudity and hypersexualized dress send the wrong signal to young girls modeling their behavior after the adult women around them, framing it as protective rather than restrictive. Critics have called this posture judgmental or outdated for a modern audience. Supporters frame it as consistency between his lyrics and his private conduct, a debate that's trailed him for nearly 2 decades without any real resolution. That same principle shapes who he'll work with musically. He's openly admitted he won't collaborate with artists whose music leans too heavily into explicit or destructive themes, drawing a firm line regardless of how commercially popular those artists currently are, a stance that's reportedly closed the door on potential joint records with several high-profile dancehall names over the years. Fans have debated for years whether that refusal to bend limited his commercial ceiling, keeping him respected but never quite as ubiquitous as some of his more crossover-friendly peers. He's never treated that trade-off as a mistake worth correcting. Now, back to where we started, the fainting controversy. That same uncompromising conviction runs straight through his relationship with diet. He's spoken openly about abandoning meat entirely, describing it as a gradual transition rather than a sudden switch, replacing animal protein with fruits, vegetables, and combinations passed down from his grandmother's cooking rather than store-bought substitutes. When skeptics tried to weaponize a documented fainting incident early in his career as proof that his plant-based lifestyle was physically unsustainable for someone touring and performing at his pace, he pushed back hard, attributing the episode to simple dehydration rather than any nutritional deficiency, and characterizing the entire rumor as a coordinated attempt by people opposed to veganism to discredit a lifestyle they themselves could never sustain. That same grounded, almost stoic perspective shows up everywhere else in how he talks about his life. Asked whether rising crime across Jamaica frightens him personally, he said fear accomplishes nothing productive, arguing instead that communities need to unite around cleanup and mutual respect, rather than living paralyzed by anxiety over violence they can't individually control. Asked whether he's satisfied with everything he's accomplished, he answered with genuine gratitude, acknowledging things could have turned out far worse, and that every rough patch along the way shaped him into someone tougher than before. Resilience partly forged through early industry mistakes around contracts and business terms that taught him, expensively, to read every fine print detail before signing anything again. Pressed on whether anything ever tempts him to abandon his principles, fame, money, simple human weakness, he insisted nothing genuinely pulls him off course, describing his moral compass as fixed rather than something he actively has to fight against day to day. Despite the controversies and the refusal to soften his message for broader commercial appeal, Wayne has maintained a loyal international following for over 2 decades, still booking festival slots at major reggae showcases across the Caribbean, Europe, and North America well into 2025, including appearances at Rebel Salute and Reggae Sumfest, alongside a new generation of artists who grew up on his early records. He never chased the crossover pop explosion that turned some of his peers into global superstars, choosing instead to stay locked into a niche built on discipline and conviction. Even when that conviction cost him commercial opportunities other artists would have taken without a second thought. As of 2026, his net worth is estimated at around $1 million, built almost entirely through decades of touring, album sales, and songwriting royalties, rather than the kind of business diversification that's made other entertainers exponentially wealthier. It's a modest figure for an artist who consistently chose message over marketability at nearly every turn. Peers who entered the scene alongside him have built far larger fortunes through crossover deals and brand partnerships, but within roots reggae circles specifically, his name still carries a weight money alone can't buy. If this journey through conviction, controversy, and quiet resilience struck a nerve with you, drop your biggest takeaway below. What part of his story surprised you the most? And which stance do you think has aged the best over time?